Jefferson was involved in one of the most famous and perhaps the most important Supreme Court case in our history, and that's the case of Marbury versus Madison in 1803. What leads up to Marbury versus Madison is interesting, but not entirely important. It deals with something called the case of the Midnight Judges. The Federalists, knowing that they were going to be out of power in 1800, passed a law called the Judiciary Act of 1801. In the lame duck session between the end of the Adams presidency and the beginning of the Jefferson presidency. In that period, this law was going to add something like 16 new justices to the federal court system, and those justices would be appointed by Adams and approved by the Federalist Congress, which means that they would be Federalist judges, and most of them would be appointed for life. The issue is that when making the commissions, the letters announcing the hiring for the new judges, not all of them got delivered on time. The one that leads to this case is William Marbury. The legend is that they were up until midnight the night before writing them. That's probably apocryphal. But the letter to William Marbury was not delivered. Marbury, being a Federalist, understood that he was going to be getting this appointment. When it was undelivered and Jefferson took office, Jefferson ordered his Secretary of State, James Madison, not to deliver the letter, partially because he didn't want Federalists in power, partially because he was trying to shrink the size of government. In any rate, Marbury knows that he's supposed to get this commission, and he doesn't get it. So he sues the administration, Madison, in order to get this letter. He through part of what's called a writ of mandamus. He wants the Supreme Court to order the delivery of the letter. Chief Justice John Marshall is a Federalist. He's now in charge of the Supreme Court, and he sees that there's a problem. If the Federalist John Marshall orders the writ of mandamus to force Jefferson to deliver the letter, Jefferson's just going to refuse, which makes an already weak Supreme Court even weaker. The Supreme Court didn't even have its own building at this point. It was sort of an afterthought. So Jefferson, in order to avoid a confrontation, he has to come up with an elegant solution. Marshall argues that while Marbury deserves to have the letter, he deserves the commission, it is not in the authority of the Supreme Court to do so because of jurisdiction. What Marshall does is looks at the law that allows the delivery of the letter to be issued. Then he looks at the Constitution, and he sees that the Constitution says that the Supreme Court only has original jurisdiction, meaning the case has to work its way up the chain. It can't start at the Supreme Court. Only in cases dealing with foreign ambassadors or other nations. So he says that the law is unconstitutional. We can't follow the law because it doesn't follow the Constitution. And when a law doesn't follow the Constitution, it has to be thrown out. This is a very elegant solution. The Federalist Chief Justice avoids picking a fight with the Democratic president by elevating the status of the Supreme Court. This is a first. He makes the Supreme Court a vital third branch because what he does is give the Supreme Court something called the power of judicial review. In other words, the Supreme Court gets to say what the law means, and they get to overrule both Congress and the president. They get to declare if a law is unconstitutional or not. If you remember going back to the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, Madison and Jefferson had argued that the states should be able to decide when a federal law is unconstitutional or not. Madison says, no, it's the Supreme Court that has this power. And it sets up the Supreme Court as a vital and important check on both Congress and the president.